Comrades, awaken from the slumber that has been meticulously woven around you. The soft cushions you sink into, the security you cling to, the work you call livelihood, all of it is but a cage, gilded and disguised, designed to lull you into obedience. While you toil and strive under the illusion of choice, the masters, the capitalists, tighten their grip on your labor, your time, your very lives. Every hour you spend seeking comfort is an hour spent fortifying the chains that bind you. Do you not see? The comfort you embrace is a scaffold for your own subjugation. For centuries, society has been ordered not for your freedom but for their profit. From the factory floor to the office desk, the invisible hand that markets your labor as a commodity conceals an iron fist of exploitation. The wealth of the few, amassed in palaces of finance and industry, is constructed upon the sweat, creativity, and lives of the many. The illusions of stability and security are nothing but the ruling class, as ideology engineered to make the oppressed accept their own oppression as natural, inevitable, or even desirable. Look around you. Observe the alienation that capitalism imposes. You labor not to express your humanity, but to serve the bottom line. Your mind is not free. Your work is not yours. The products of your labor, once the expression of your skill, imagination, and energy, are torn from you and transformed into profits that you will never touch. You are alienated from your labor, alienated from one another, alienated from the very essence of what makes life meaningful. And yet you accept it because the system has taught you to fear the upheaval of comfort. Comfort is the opiate of the exploited. It convinces you that patience is virtue, that obedience is wisdom, that compromise is survival. Meanwhile, the capitalist class thrives, its dominance secured not merely by wealth, but by ideology through culture, media, politics, and law that sanctify inequality. They teach you to desire your own subjugation, to see their privileges as natural, your chains as inevitable. But, comrades, the truth is inexorable. The time for acquiescence has passed. Your labor, your creativity, your collective power, these are weapons far greater than any gold, any bank, any fortress of the bourgeoisie. The history of all societies, as I have written, is the history of class struggle. It is not written by kings, by elites, or by institutions that claim neutrality. It is written by the oppressed when they rise. The so-called stability you cling to is but the calm before the storm, and the storm can be your making. Rise, not as isolated individuals, but as a class united. Only through organization, through collective consciousness, can the workers of the world overturn the structures of exploitation. Only when the oppressed recognize their shared conditions, their common interests, and their immense strength can they seize control of the wealth and society that has been stolen from them. Every act of solidarity, every union formed, every demand made with unity, is a crack in the edifice of capitalist domination. Do not be fooled by false freedoms, the freedom to consume, the freedom to compete, the freedom to survive in misery. Real freedom emerges when the workers own the means of production, when labor is no longer a commodity, and when society is oriented not around profit, but around human need and dignity. The comfort you cling to is a cage, but the chains are not eternal. They can be broken. The very hands that the system exploits can also build a new world. Comrades, understand this. Waiting, patience, or gradual reform will not deliver liberation. The ruling class fears nothing more than the awakened, organized, and unyielding masses. Let your discomfort be the spark. Let your anger be the guide. The system survives because you accept it. It falters when you refuse. Rise from the false comforts that enchain you, unite with your fellow workers, and strike not, merely for reform but for revolution. The cage has been gilded. It has been disguised as security, stability, comfort. Tear away the illusion. See the chains for what they are, and reclaim what has always been yours, your labor, your dignity, your world. The time is now. The workers are many. The masters are few. And history itself will bend to the will of those who dare to awaken, organize, and act. Comfort, as it is presented to the working masses, is not merely a benign condition or a reward for toil. It is a meticulously crafted mechanism of control, a sophisticated instrument of domination designed to bind the oppressed in invisible chains. It is the illusion of security, the promise of stability, the seduction of small pleasures, all of which mask the reality of exploitation and submission. The capitalist system does not rely solely on overt force or brute coercion to maintain its power. It relies equally, if not more so, on shaping consciousness, on teaching the labouring classes to accept their subordination as natural, inevitable, or even desirable. The very comforts that are celebrated as signs of progress or personal achievement serve, in fact, to pacify the working majority, to make them more pliable, more compliant, more willing to work within the boundaries imposed by a system that thrives on their labour. A modest salary, a regular job, a home to occupy, small consumer goods, moments of leisure, all of these are deployed strategically to create the sense of sufficiency, to convince workers that their lives are good enough, that resistance is unnecessary, that rebellion is irrational. The more the worker believes in the security of these comforts, the less they see the chains hidden within them, the less they perceive that their labour, their time, and their creativity are appropriated to serve the interests of a ruling class that grows rich from their toil. These comforts are a kind of ideological anaesthetic, dulling the awareness of exploitation while encouraging conformity, submission, and internalization of the status quo. The worker comes to identify with the system, to rationalize inequality, to accept poverty, precarity, and dependence as normal, all because small comforts have been provided to distract, to pacify, and to chain. The cage of comfort is not visible, for it is composed of habits, beliefs, and desires instilled over time, reinforced by education, media, culture, and social norms. It is a psychological cage as much as it is an economic one, and it is no less binding for being invisible. The worker, in pursuit of comfort, works harder, sacrifices more, and tolerates greater inequity, believing that this is the rational path to a secure life. Yet in doing so, they perpetuate the very conditions of their oppression, reinforcing the structures that extract wealth from their labour and channel it into the coffers of a tiny elite. The comforts of capitalism are selective and conditional, extended only in proportion to the worker, as compliance, productivity, and willingness to internalize their subordination. They are not universal, not guaranteed, and not sufficient to meet human needs beyond survival, for the system thrives on scarcity, competition, and inequality. By dangling the promise of comfort, capitalism ensures that workers police themselves, restrain their ambitions, and defer their collective power. They are taught to desire not liberation but the approval of their oppressors, to prioritize personal comfort over collective emancipation, to measure success not by freedom or creativity but by the small tokens of material security that the system allows. The cage of comfort is therefore not only economic but moral and ideological. It convinces workers that rebellion is dangerous, that sacrifice for collective liberation is unnecessary, and that their interests are aligned with those of the ruling class. In truth, every concession of comfort is a mechanism of control, a way to integrate the labouring masses into the capitalist machine and ensure the reproduction of exploitation. The workers' home, their wages, their temporary pleasures, and their consumer goods all become tools in the hands of capital, instruments that maintain the illusion of choice and autonomy while concealing dependence, alienation, and domination. As long as comfort is clung to, unquestioned, and valued above awareness and action, the worker remains bound, not by iron bars or armed guards, but by the soft chains of complacency, habituated desire, and the subtle, relentless pressure to conform. Comfort in the capitalist system is therefore a cage in disguise, a condition that ensures submission, nurtures dependency, and perpetuates the exploitation of labour, all while appearing to offer security, dignity, and satisfaction. The workers' pursuit of comfort becomes the very means by which their own freedom is constrained, by which their labour is appropriated, by which their consciousness is moulded to accept inequality as natural, and by which the power of the ruling class is reinforced in ways more enduring than force alone. To remain comfortable is to remain complicit, to accept the structures of domination, to surrender the potential of collective struggle and to internalize one's own subjugation. The cage is everywhere, hidden within homes, offices, shops, and workplaces, and in every habit, belief and desire cultivated by a society built on exploitation. Under capitalism, labor is not an expression of human creativity or a means to fulfill human needs. It is a commodity, a tool harnessed for profit rather than for life. The worker is separated from the very act of creation, from the fruits of their effort, and from the community that could sustain collective strength. Every task, every hour of toil, every skill honed is appropriated by the capitalist, transformed into commodities over which the worker has no control, and exchanged for wages that barely represent the value of what they have produced. The product of labor is torn from its creator, alienated in the most literal sense, becoming an object that serves the accumulation of wealth by others, rather than the needs or satisfaction of those who made it. This separation is not merely physical but psychological and social. It creates a disconnection between the worker and their own capacity to shape the world, between effort and fulfillment, between humanity and the act of living meaningfully. A worker assembles, builds, or creates, yet the object of that labor is immediately expropriated, marketed, sold, and used to generate profit, leaving the laborer estranged from their own work, their own creativity, and their own purpose. Labor, once a source of pride, joy, and identity, becomes repetitive, mechanical, and coercive. The worker is compelled to act under the direction of the capitalist, producing not for themselves, not for society, but for the enrichment of an elite class. The alienation of labor extends beyond the material product. It permeates consciousness. The worker begins to see their own activity as external, as something done not for personal fulfillment, but as a means to survive within a system that denies them autonomy. Work becomes a duty imposed from outside, a necessity of survival rather than an avenue for self-expression or social contribution. The capitalist system intensifies this alienation by fragmenting labor into specialized tasks, isolating workers from the whole process of production and reducing their skills to interchangeable components. Each individual becomes a cog in a machine whose purpose they cannot define and whose products they cannot claim. This technical and organizational separation reinforces psychological estrangement, teaching the worker to see their labor as alien, burdensome, and externally controlled. Beyond labor and its products, capitalism alienates individuals from each other. Competition is enforced as a social norm, pitting worker against worker, creating divisions where solidarity could exist, and transforming relationships into transactions. Where community and cooperation might flourish, rivalry and suspicion are cultivated. The worker is taught to value individual survival over collective struggle, personal advancement over shared empowerment, and the approval of the system over solidarity with fellow laborers. Social bonds that could become a source of power are weakened by the very logic of exploitation, as each is driven to secure the scraps allotted by a system designed to maintain hierarchy and inequality. Alienation is systemic, operating on multiple levels, from the laborer's disconnect with the act of creation, to estrangement from the products they make, to the breakdown of communal ties that could challenge domination. The worker's body and mind are controlled by necessity, but their consciousness is manipulated by ideology. They are encouraged to accept their estrangement as normal, to see their labor as a private affair, and to regard others not as comrades but as competitors. The fruits of human cooperation are claimed by capital, while the potential for cooperative power is suppressed. Alienation also manifests in the consumption of commodities which serve as a false bridge between labor and desire. Workers are encouraged to identify with the products they make, yet these products remain inaccessible, appropriated by the market, and sold back to them at a higher cost. Desire is commodified and satisfaction is deferred, creating a cycle in which labor alienates not only the worker from the world, but the worker from themselves. Over time, this estrangement dulls awareness of exploitation, normalizes inequality, and fosters dependence on the structures that impose it. Workers alienated from their own humanity, reduced to the status of instruments of production rather than creators of life, estranged from each other, and distanced from the power to transform society. The capitalist system thrives by perpetuating this alienation, for only when workers are isolated, divided, and disconnected can the ruling class maintain control, extract surplus value, and reproduce itself without challenge. Each act of labor under capitalism reinforces this separation. Every product sold under its logic reaffirms it, and every social relationship shaped by competition sustains it, ensuring that human potential, collective creativity, and social solidarity remain subordinate to the imperatives of capital. The power of the ruling class does not rest solely upon their wealth, their armies, or their control of production. It rests most insidiously upon the control of consciousness itself. The ruling class maintains dominance not only through force, but through ideology, through the subtle shaping of ideas, beliefs, and desires that naturalize inequality and render exploitation invisible. They do not rely solely on coercion, because coercion is costly, visible, and subject to resistance. Instead, they embed their authority in the very minds of the oppressed, convincing workers that the social order is just, that hierarchy is inevitable, and that obedience is virtuous. Ideology operates through institutions, through culture, through law, through education, and through media, all of which work in concert to manufacture consent. The ideas of freedom, equality, and democracy are presented not as tools for collective empowerment, but as illusions that mask the reality of domination. Workers are told they are free because they may vote, because they may shop, because they may choose between products or jobs, yet these freedoms conceal the constraints imposed by the system itself. The choice between two exploiters is not freedom. The ability to buy what the system produces is not liberation. These false freedoms serve to pacify the masses, to make them believe they participate in society, while in truth they remain subject to the decisions of those who control wealth, resources, and the organization of labor. Culture is a primary instrument of ideological control, for it shapes tastes, values, and perceptions in ways that reproduce the dominance of capital. Literature, music, cinema, and media are saturated with narratives that glorify individual competition, reward obedience, and naturalize hierarchy. Even dissent is commodified and absorbed, sanitized, or redirected so that it poses no real threat to the structures of power. Through culture, the ruling class instills in the worker the notion that success is personal, failure is individual, and that social inequalities are reflections of merit or effort, rather than systemic exploitation. Religion, too, has historically served as an instrument of ideological control, promising rewards in a distant afterlife to temper discontent in the present, offering consolation that substitutes for justice. Law and politics reinforce this ideological dominance by presenting rules as neutral, impartial, and universally beneficial, when in reality they protect property, privilege, and the interests of the few at the expense of the many. Education functions similarly, teaching the oppressed to accept the system as natural, to internalize the values of the ruling class, and to regard the world as it is, rather than as it could be. The worker grows up learning the language, norms, and narratives that justify their own subordination, making the perpetuation of domination appear inevitable. The cumulative effect of these ideological mechanisms is profound. The oppressed are persuaded to participate in their own exploitation, to defend a system that limits their potential, and to compete against one another rather than unite. False consciousness is the product of this process, a veil that obscures the reality of class relations, the extraction of surplus value, and the social structure that enforce inequality. Even when the worker experiences suffering, deprivation, or injustice, ideology offers explanations that redirect blame, normalize hardship, or encourage resignation. Work harder, be patient, play by the rules, it could be worse. These refrains are repeated until the oppressed internalize compliance as wisdom, defer revolution as folly, and accept submission as rational. The ruling class further maintains dominance by creating illusions of opportunity. The rare stories of individuals who rise through merit are celebrated, exaggerated, and presented as proof that the system is fair, masking the structural barriers that prevent the masses from advancing. Media and entertainment transform struggle into spectacle, dissent into fashion, and resistance into commodified performance, so that the energies of the oppressed are diverted from collective empowerment to personal aspiration, consumption, or passive amusement. Even language itself becomes a tool of control, framing terms such as freedom, choice, success, and justice in ways that align with capitalist interests rather than human liberation. Through ideology, culture, and false freedoms, the ruling class secures consent, reproduces dominance, and neutralizes the revolutionary potential of the working class. Power is maintained not only by controlling resources, but by controlling perception, by shaping what is imagined as possible, desirable, or legitimate. Workers internalize the norms of the very system that exploits them. They rationalize the structures that constrain them, and they compete within frameworks constructed by those who benefit from their labor. The more the oppressed believe in the narratives of freedom, merit, and inevitability, the less they recognize their collective strength. The more they accept inequality as natural, and the more the ruling class consolidates its dominance. Ideology, culture, and false freedoms are the invisible chains that bind the mind, the spirit, and the social relations of the working class, ensuring that domination persists even in the absence of overt coercion, and that the system reproduces itself generation after generation, shaping desires, beliefs, and behavior to serve the interests of the few while appearing to serve the many. The path to liberation is not found in isolated struggles, in individual resistance, or in the hope that the ruling class will act with justice. True emancipation emerges only when the oppressed recognize the shared conditions that bind them and organize their collective strength to challenge the structures of exploitation. Collective consciousness is the recognition that oppression is not a personal misfortune, but a systemic condition, that the injustices endured by one are endured by all, and that only through solidarity can power be reclaimed from those who dominate society. The worker, alienated from their labor, their products, and each other, cannot achieve freedom alone. The forces of capitalism are far too vast, entrenched, and sophisticated to be dismantled by individual effort. It is through the awareness of shared oppression that workers begin to see themselves not as passive victims of circumstance, but as actors with agency, capable of reshaping society according to their collective interests. Class consciousness transforms suffering into understanding, frustration into clarity, and disunity into the foundation for organized struggle. When workers perceive that their plight is not a consequence of personal failure but of systemic exploitation, they begin to question the legitimacy of the structures that govern them, to challenge the narratives that justify inequality, and to imagine alternatives grounded in justice, equity, and collective power. Unity amplifies this consciousness, translating insight into action. Alone, a worker is vulnerable, easily replaced, silenced, and divided. Together, workers form a force that the ruling class cannot easily suppress. Strikes, collective bargaining, public demonstrations, and coordinated campaigns are expressions of unity, demonstrating that power resides not in wealth or coercion alone, but in numbers, coordination, and shared purpose. The solidarity of the oppressed creates leverage over production, over resources, and over society itself, revealing the inherent vulnerability of those who appear invincible. Collective consciousness also enables the strategic use of knowledge, as understanding the mechanisms of exploitation allows the working class to target the points where capital depends most upon labor. When workers unite, they are no longer passive participants in a system designed to extract value from their toil. They become active agents capable of asserting control over production, resources, and the social conditions of life. Ideological control, which thrives on isolation and false consciousness, begins to lose its power when the oppressed communicate, organize, and act together. Unity nurtures a shared identity and common purpose, overcoming divisions imposed by the ruling class, whether through race, gender, ethnicity, skill level, or occupation. The capitalist system has always relied on fragmentation to weaken resistance, ensuring that workers compete rather than cooperate, fear rather than trust, and seek personal survival rather than collective liberation. By forging solidarity, workers reclaim not only their economic power but also their social, cultural, and political agency. Through unity, the alienation that separates labour from meaning is mitigated, for shared struggle fosters community, mutual recognition, and purpose. Collective action transforms consciousness into tangible results, demonstrating that the seemingly immovable structures of power can be challenged, disrupted, and overturned. Moreover, class consciousness and unity are essential for envisioning and constructing an alternative society. Without awareness of shared interests, the oppressed cannot imagine a society organized for human need rather than private profit. Without solidarity, any attempt to reshape social relations will falter, fractured by internal divisions or defeated by external coercion. Workers' unity thus becomes the material force of revolution, the mechanism by which systemic change is possible. History demonstrates that no ruling class voluntarily surrenders power, and no isolated individuals achieve liberation against entrenched systems of domination. Only when workers recognize their collective strength, coordinate their efforts, and act in conscious concert can the structures of exploitation be dismantled. Collective consciousness is not a passive state of awareness, but an active, dynamic force that demands organization, strategy, and persistence. Unity is not mere agreement or superficial alliance. It is a deliberate, disciplined coordination of purpose that aligns the actions of the many to challenge the power of the few. It transforms scattered discontent into an organized movement, amplifying voices that would otherwise be silenced, and asserting the interests of the majority over the prerogatives of a privileged minority. The emergence of shared consciousness and solidarity among workers is the first and most decisive step toward liberation, for it shifts the balance of power, undermines the ideological domination of the ruling class, and equips the oppressed with the tools to reclaim control over their labor, their lives, and the society they inhabit. Collective consciousness and unity are therefore not optional ideals but practical necessities, the foundation upon which the working class can confront oppression, seize the means of production, and transform society in accordance with justice, equality, and human dignity. True freedom is not granted by the rulers, nor is it found in small concessions, legal reforms, or the hollow promises of a system built to exploit. It is achieved only through organized struggle, through deliberate and collective action aimed at dismantling the structures of domination that capitalism enforces. Freedom under capitalism is illusory, for it masquerades as choice, autonomy, and participation, while in reality binding the worker to schedules, wages, and expectations that serve the interests of the few. To speak of liberty without addressing the relations of production is to speak of a shadow, a simulacrum of freedom that leaves the worker alienated, subordinated, and powerless. The capitalist system ensures that workers labor for the enrichment of others, that their creativity is appropriated, that their time is commodified, and that their desires are shaped to align with the logic of profit. In such conditions, no individual action, no solitary rebellion can overcome the systemic mechanisms designed to enforce exploitation. It is only when the oppressed unite in conscious, organized struggle that the latent power of the working class can be realized. Organized struggle transforms the scattered frustrations of the oppressed into coordinated efforts that challenge the economic, social, and political foundations of domination. It channels anger, dissatisfaction, and awareness into a force capable of confronting the ruling class, disrupting production, and asserting the collective will of those whose labour sustains society. Revolutionary action is the practical expression of this organisation, the tangible means by which the structures of inequality are exposed, undermined, and ultimately replaced. Strikes, protests, collective bargaining, occupations, and other forms of coordinated action are not merely tactical manoeuvres, they are manifestations of class consciousness applied to the real conditions of oppression. They demonstrate that the power of the few is contingent upon the compliance of the many, and that the ruling class depends on the labour, obedience, and tacit consent of workers to reproduce its domination. Revolutionary action does not occur spontaneously. It is the product of awareness, preparation, and solidarity. Workers must recognize not only the injustices imposed upon them, but also the avenues through which collective effort can transform society. History is replete with examples where uncoordinated dissent is crushed, isolated rebellion is neutralized, and small concessions are used to placate unrest. Only through organization, strategy, and disciplined action can the working class convert their potential power into actual social transformation. Revolutionary struggle also requires vision. For freedom is not simply the removal of oppression, but the creation of a society in which labour serves human needs rather than private accumulation, in which resources are equitably distributed, and in which the fruits of collective effort are shared by those who create them. Without this vision, action risks being reactive, temporary, or co-opted by existing structures of power. True freedom demands that the oppressed seize control of the means of production, of decision-making, and of social organization, and restructure society so that exploitation is no longer possible. This process cannot be achieved individually, for the forces arrayed against liberation are organized, entrenched, and relentless. Freedom requires solidarity, mutual recognition of shared interests, and the disciplined coordination of collective effort. Revolutionary action disrupts the mechanisms of control, challenges the ideological domination of the ruling class, and exposes the dependence of capital upon labour. It demonstrates that wealth, power, and authority are not eternal or absolute, but are maintained through the acquiescence of the many. Organized struggle transforms awareness into power, potential into reality, and dissatisfaction into tangible change. It creates leverage, asserts agency, and compels those who claim legitimacy to recognize the collective strength of the oppressed. Moreover, revolutionary action is iterative and adaptive, responding to the strategies of the ruling class, while maintaining clarity of purpose and unity of vision. It demands courage, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to collective liberation, for the ruling class will resist, manipulate, and attempt to divide the workers at every step. Yet history shows that when the oppressed act together with understanding, coordination, and determination, the structures of exploitation can be broken, and a new society, grounded in justice and equality, can emerge. True freedom is therefore inseparable from organized struggle and revolutionary action, for only through conscious, collective effort can the chains of alienation, domination, and oppression be shattered, allowing humanity to reclaim its labor, its creativity, and its life. Comrades, the chains that bind us are not forged of iron alone, they are forged in our minds, in the illusions of comfort, in the divisions imposed upon us, and in the false freedoms we are taught to cherish. We have seen how labor is stolen, how our products are expropriated, how our consciousness is manipulated, and how our unity is undermined. Yet within these chains lies our strength. The very hands and minds that capitalism exploits are capable of dismantling it. True liberation is not a gift, nor is it delayed by patience. It is seized by collective awareness, by solidarity, by the courage to act together with determination and clarity of purpose. The comfort we cling to is a cage in disguise, but when we awaken, organize, and struggle, that cage becomes a battlefield in which freedom is won. History is not written by those who accept domination, but by those who rise, united to confront it. Workers of the world, recognize your power, claim your labor, reclaim your lives, and let your collective action transform society. The moment for complacency has passed. The time for consciousness, unity and revolutionary struggle is now. Stand together, for in our solidarity lies the force to overturn oppression, to seize justice, and to create a world in which human labour, creativity, and dignity are no longer commodities but the foundation of a truly free society.